Thoreau lived at a house called the Yellow House from 1850 until his death in 1862. And this is a photograph of the Yellow House at that time, and it still is privately owned. So before our trip coming up here, I contacted the owners of the Yellow House at that time, the Dinsmore family, and explained who Gilbert was, and we were coming out. Would it be possible for Gilbert to see the inside of the house? And Mrs. Dinsmore was most gracious and said, please come, we'd be happy to have you. And Thoreau lived in the attic of this house, where he wrote most of his journals and finished up the draft of his most famous book, Walden. And you can see right up here, it's obviously where the attic is. The small shed here was, at that time, the pencil factory, which was how the Thoreau family made their living. They are credited with making the best pencils in the United States at that time. And nowadays, Thoreau pencils are very scarce. There's Gilbert upstairs in the attic. This young fellow here is me. That was a lot of fun being there. I'd never seen the house before. And of course, be able to get into the house, one of the houses actually Thoreau lived in. We know exactly the inspiration for Gilbert's poem, Thoreau's Attic, because in fact he was inspired by Thoreau's attic. Thoreau's attic. This was Henry's last home. He called it the Yellow House and claimed the third floor attic for his room, his refuge. From his gossiping aunts, the trivialities of Concord from the world that knew him not. We climbed the steep steps, found the attic empty, clean and dustless, without a single cobweb. Had Sophia's ghost returned to do the dusting, Henry refused to let her do. He was afraid she might disturb the wren's nest or a robin's egg he brought home from a woodland ramble. His room was cluttered, books everywhere, scattered clothing, his shoes, stuffed birds, specimens of rock, Indian arrowheads, his desk with paper, pencils, pen and ink, his snowshoes in a corner with his surveyor's chain, ice skates, his bed, telescope, and magnifying glass, his music box, his flute. No wonder he urged others to simplify their lives. This low-ceilinged attic room was his laboratory and his library. For more than 10 years after a day in the field, he wrote nightly in his journal. That late March day, he captured a flying squirrel and carried it home in his handkerchief. That May day, the peeping frogs captured Henry's ear, and he carried the tiny hylas home to study them closely. The skylight brings the sun to this attic room, just as it did in Henry's day. Here he wrote the published draft of Walden. He reported his walks around Concord and his longer journeys to Maine, Cape Cod, and Canada. Here he wrote that lecture in defense of Captain John Brown. Here he composed occasional poems he cut and rewrote to leave his mark on American literature. In his last struggle with tuberculosis, he knew his days were few. Henry refused to die in this attic room that had long nourished him. He was carried down to the parlor where an aunt chided him. "Henry, I hope you've made your peace with God." "I've never quarreled with an aunt," Henry Thoreau replied. Nowadays, when the ghost in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery have a birthday party for their Henry, if the moon is full, playful Henry will fly down a moonbeam through the skylight to visit his attic room.